how is design infiltrating business in a new way? How is it reaching every inch of the business, not just this like quiet little office with like color and trim?
Hello, I'm Doug Powell. Welcome to This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. What are the central stories in the design industry today, and how is the business media covering them? In this POV edition, I speak with journalist Nicole Gull-McElroy, who reports on business and design for Fortune, Fast Company, and Wired, among other publications. Nicole was the lead editor for Fortune's By Design newsletter, and last January she wrote an excellent article for Fast Company examining the effects of designer layoffs in the tech industry. Nicole's wide-ranging career as a reporter goes back more than 2 decades to her job as a staff reporter covering local news for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram newspaper in the early 2000s. And that's where I start my conversation with Nicole Gull-McElroy.
So it wasn't something I was really looking for. Business, even as a beat, wasn't something I was looking for at all. I started in newspapers, and as you do when you kind of start as a rookie reporter, you usually get stuck on cops and fire, and that's what I did. I did night cops at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and I was like walking around the newsroom with the police scanner at all times. So like if I went in the ladies' room and somebody was already in there and they heard the police scanner going, they'd be like, "Hi, Nicole." They just knew I was in there because the police scanner was always on me. And I thought I wanted to work in newspapers, and the more I kind of looked around the newsroom, while everyone I worked with was really lovely, I just kind of realized I don't know that I want this life, because the deadlines are really fast, and it's not so much that I didn't enjoy that pace. I did, but I was 22 and I had no life. Like I could be there until midnight. It didn't matter. And filing 3 stories a day, and that was not an issue because I didn't really have anything else to do. And I was living in Texas, and I wasn't from Texas, and I didn't know anybody, and I had no friends. I had no social life, That was it. But it was great training ground, and I learned to be really efficient and fast and get it right. That was super important, because if you didn't, you'd hear about it immediately. Not just from your editor, from whoever read the paper that was like, "Oh yeah, that's actually not true, and that's not how you spell my name, and my daughter's name is not that, and I don't live there." And
immediate feedback loop.
Oh, for sure, immediate. And so I decided I wanted to go back to New York. I had been in New York City prior in graduate school and done a bunch of internships throughout college there. I wanted to be back in New York, and I wanted to work in magazines. But it was so hard to get a job, like so hard. And it just happened that at the time, Inc. magazine was moving from Boston to New York. It had been acquired by Gruner & Jahr. And basically, I had a family friend that worked at Gruner & Jahr. And she got me an interview. And I met with HR there, and then I met with a woman named Jane Berenson at Inc., who was the executive editor at the time. And I didn't think I was going to get the job because she asked me all kinds of questions that I was very candid that I didn't know the answer to. Like, she asked me what an angel investor is, and I was like, I have no idea what an angel investor is, but I'm happy to find out.
Is this a trick question?
I'll look it up. She asked me very specific questions about business and entrepreneurship, and I didn't know anything. It ended up that I clicked with her.
Oh, interesting.
It was an entry-level job. I was a fact checker and reporter, and there were 4 of us that were hired at one time. And we all kind of sat in like a bullpen, and that's how I ended up covering business and working on the Inc. 500 list there. Everyone on staff worked on it all summer long, and we each had, 75 entrepreneurs to interview, in addition to a bunch of freelancers that they hired to work on the list too. And so we literally sat there every day, all day, and just interviewed Kevin Plank, from Under Armour, and just constantly all day long, you just had calls all day with these entrepreneurs to write these little profiles of the people that were on the list. And so that was my baptism by fire to covering business. And I think through that process, the first time working on the Inc. 500 list, I realized these people were just people that had ideas. And it wasn't so much about business. It was about an idea that they had. They were either solving a problem for themselves or wanted to create a life for themselves or their family. They felt like they could only do it if they were in control. Or they were frustrated in a corporate job and saw, an inefficiency that they could solve for in some capacity, or an opportunity to make money in a way that wasn't already being done. And the more people I talked to, the more I was like, wait a minute, this is actually really cool. And these people are super interesting, and they're funny, and they're grounded, and they have really like big dreams. And that's just the human experience. And that's just interesting. Like, doesn't even matter. This is not about like sales and marketing or EBITDA or, whatever.
Which is very, very interesting, because what you just described is what a designer would do. A designer would find the human experience, as you describe it, the human story, and connect with that and understand that problem to be solved or that experience to be figured out. And that's the entry point. Then it gets interesting, right?
Yeah, it was really interesting. And then I ended up leaving there, and I worked at Men's Journal for a while, which was more aligned with just sort of like my personal interests. I love skiing and running and hiking and all kinds of outdoor stuff. So that was really fun, but also very different. And then I've been freelancing since I started, since I became a parent and we had to move around for my husband's job. So I was writing for Fortune, and they had this newsletter, Business by Design, going for a while. It was dormant for a bit, and they wanted to pick it back up again. And this one editor that I work with pretty regularly at Fortune, I guess, had thrown my name in saying she would be good at this. Why don't you see if she wants to pick it back up? The one digital editor had emailed me and said, hey, are you interested in doing our design newsletter? And I said, I don't know anything about design, but I'm willing to talk to you about it. Sure. Like, I'm happy to learn about it. And so I ended up starting the newsletter, and that was kind of like, okay, now this is like a new beat for me. And I kind of went back to my like journalism school days, where you just call one person, you find one person, you ask them for 3 names, you call those 3 people, you ask each of those people for 3 names, you call all of those people, and then suddenly you have like a network of sources, a host of people that know what they're talking about, that can answer your questions and explain things to you. And I think the first story I did was like super basic, and it was really like businesses hiring CDOs and like making space in the C-suite for a design officer. And I focused the story around Salesforce and Logitech. And I spoke to Bracken Darrell and Alistair Curtis, and they were so informative and so helpful. And I was lucky that those were the people I called, because they're also really well connected. And
they know 3 people who know 3 people, et cetera.
Yeah, it was just like suddenly this whole world of people were open to me. And I think the story was also just like a very basic story. Like, how is design infiltrating business in a new way? How is it reaching every inch of the business, not just this like quiet little office with like color and trim?
I can see how at that moment you thought, okay, this is a pretty straightforward story, or a basic story, as you say, but in some ways it's also the essential sort of central story of this moment in design, or the moment a few years ago when you were, first getting into it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just become increasingly more dynamic, that storyline. And I think what I realized is there's so many different kinds of design, and it's just so wide-reaching. And it also raised so many questions about just like, thinking about education and design schools, and preparing design students to be in this world now where your ultimate job might not actually even be as a designer. You're maybe running a team, or you're running a vertical, and you have to have an entirely different yet complementary skill set to do that within a Fortune 500 business, or even if it's a privately held company, in order to innovate and move with whatever macroeconomic tailwinds you're having to deal with. And I think that there's also a level of understanding and communication within the business world that maybe business schools need to be kind of hip to in terms of communication and nuance and empathy and having a human-centered approach to how you can categorize your business or whatever it is that you do, whether it's a service, a product, whatever.
Let's talk a little bit about the array of types of design that you discovered. I imagine that coming in and having that assignment on your desk from Fortune, you probably had a preconception about what design was at that moment. And then, as you say, you began to discover, oh, wait, design actually happens in all these different ways. I know you've written about furniture design and design in the auto industry and all of the, and tech, of course. Tell me about some of those different types of design and what that revealed for you about this new space that you were beginning to report on.
I think it really kind of just made me realize that it's about problem solving and kind of a level setting of what is and what's next and sort of like what could be and like connecting whatever dots there are between those things. I have not had a snore of a conversation yet. All of these conversations have been really interesting and filled with humor and tons of anecdotes. I mean, there's plenty of times you get on a phone with someone and you have to talk to them because they're the gatekeeper to whatever information that you need. And you're sort of like, oh gosh, it's a real snooze fest. But that hasn't happened. I mean, since I've been covering this space, I've had so many great conversations, so many interesting people. And I think that's reflected in the businesses that they start and work for and build. And it's just like seems like an endless opportunity to come up with ideas. And there's so many stories. There's just so many. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine many of the leaders and the people that you're encountering are struggling in some way, right? They're working in really complex businesses in many cases. So as you say, the problems that they're trying to solve are not easy ones. And there's a lot of pressure there, and increasing pressure as design becomes more valued and design, there's more at stake. Do you get a sense of that intensity or that pressure when you're speaking to leaders especially?
Yeah, I think so, because I do think in some ways there's a lot of pressure on design teams to like sort of deliver and pull through and solve the problems and save the day. But then at the same time, and this kind of came up when I wrote a story for Fast Company about tech and design layoffs. There were some people that were kind of like, okay, now design has a seat at the table. But then at the same time, the consequence of that is like when heads are going to roll, some design heads are going to roll, so.
Whereas before design was maybe had a little protective bubble or
it had like a little asterisk next to it.
Yeah. It wasn't necessarily going to get the axe when the rest of the business did. But now, as you say, that's part of the.
It is, because it's more of an integral part of the core piece of every day making the donuts. There's like this double-edged reality. And I do think it is a special skill set, but I do think it's available to everyone. While not everyone is a designer, I think there are tools that we all can use in whatever it is that we're doing that are valuable and help us understand ourselves, each other, our work, and kind of solve problems. I keep talking about problem solving, but I really do think that's kind of at the root of design. I think that it's a through line in business today.
Yeah, and those designerly behaviors, to your point, not everyone is going to be a designer, but those behaviors, those approaches, some of the methodologies that designers use, certainly the mindset, and we talk about design thinking and that way that a designer thinks that's different than, another professional. Pieces of that can be applied by anyone. And when it is, and maybe this is part of the part of the clue as to why design is being maybe is threatened a bit right now in the current economy and so on, because not enough of that has happened. There hasn't been that sort of mind share of design thinking across businesses.
I think that it's becoming more a part of the way I think businesses are hiring designers, and I think they always will. I don't think that's going to go away, especially as technology continues to just rule the world. It's just almost every business is a tech business in some capacity now, and it's hard to separate from that. And I think innovation is also another buzzword that people talk about and use when they're talking about their businesses or their growth or any sort of trajectory forward.
Back to that Fast Company story that you wrote, came out early in 2023. And I remember you and I speaking about that story. It was a time when, gosh, it seemed like every day you would look on LinkedIn and there would just be these post after post after post of people who have just gotten notified that they've been laid off. Their whole team had been laid off. It was just like really pretty intense pattern that was prevalent in that moment. And I know that was kind of the backdrop for that story. Mm-hmm. And yet, to your point, you're also saying, well, design is here to stay. So maybe those companies that were doing the big layoffs 6 to 12 months ago are not the companies where the next opportunity for design is. Is that something that was revealed in the story as you wrote it?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's still kind of unfolding. I mean, Google had a ton of layoffs, right? They laid off some really big names in design.
Yeah.
But those people, I don't know where all of them are now, but I know they are not sitting at home. And there was one person who I quoted, who I did not speak to. I just saw on his LinkedIn profile, he had written something like, ex-Googlers unite, like, let's all meet for coffee and do our own startup, like, screw it. Come on. And I did go back on his LinkedIn profile, and he has another document on there, like, ex-Googler startup. And there's all of these like bullet points. And I'm assuming that he and a handful of other people are continuing to work on something. Yeah. I do think that like anytime you have a break like that in your life, anytime there's something that happens, a loss, or you feel like it's a loss, it's just an opportunity for something else. It's just making room for something else. It may not feel that way in the moment. Like I've been laid off in 2009. I was laid off at Men's Journal and it sucked. But had that never happened, I probably would still be living in Manhattan doing exactly what I was doing. I don't know.
Yeah, there's nothing to provoke a soul searching like being unexpectedly laid off. You've suddenly got a lot of time, a lot of space. You've got to figure out what's next for yourself, and you got to solve that.
Yeah, you have to start a process. You have to build a process, and you have to see it through. And I think it will be interesting to see. I think it's still kind of percolating, the fallout from those layoffs, what will come. And, a lot of people during that time were like, oh, that's how Airbnb started. That's how all of these amazing...
It becomes a moment of innovation and...
Yeah, and what's the next generation of that? And that's going to come from this. And maybe it will. I don't know. It might. But yeah. I definitely think a lot of talented, smart people were let loose into the economy. And they're going to continue being talented and smart and capable and coming up with new ideas. And they're not just sitting at home.
Yeah, yeah. Do you see untouched, or maybe not untouched, but undersaturated parts of the business world that sectors, whether it's a sector or a geography or a particular industry, that is sort of prime for that kind of talent to touch it and to have an impact?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's room for it everywhere, but I do think like healthcare seems to really be leveraging design in a interesting way. And mental health for sure. I think there'll be a lot of cross-pollination. Like if you look at like gaming and then you look at or like social media and then mental health. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for there to be some crossover in a lot of different industries that might do some good.
Yeah.
And I think like AI is just exploding, but it will be interesting to see who's at the helm of it going forward and what that means for the future of it and how it's used. Like, will it be used for good or evil? I think that there's a lot going on there that we don't yet even know about.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that surfacing? Is AI and the sort of prevailing attitude around AI from a design point of view, is that surfacing in the conversations you're having and the reporting you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of people are worried about it, and I think it's scary. But I also think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of really wonderful things that can come out of it, and a lot of learning that as a society we can benefit from.
There's some interesting impact on design practices that will emerge, and I'm already kind of seeing this, for instance, the process of researching, and this is, similar to how a journalist would do a bunch of research and then have to synthesize, and a design researcher will do, a user researcher will do a similar, kind of go through a similar process. And that synthesis or that process of prototyping or finding those patterns through a series of insights, AI can have a huge impact on that. So that's an interesting space too, very focused on the doing of design.
Yeah, I think another area is sustainability and waste. And, I think that there's opportunity to just look at our resources, how we use them, what we throw away of them, and kind of how we can move forward in a tidier way, I guess.
Sure.
I think that's another growing area where design is going to be able to shine.
Yeah. I know you've done some recent reporting on the auto industry, certainly an industry that's being touched by all of what we're talking about, is in the midst of pretty radical transformation. But how are you seeing design being used, being valued? Is it being seen as a part of the answer in the auto industry, or is it kind of being, I don't know, sort of typically marginalized?
I think it's pretty front and center.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a huge deal. And I think it's funny because I was even telling my kids the other day, like, I used to watch this show called The Jetsons when I was a kid. They were kind of like, what? It's just funny how it's not exactly the Jetsons, but we're kind of getting there. The girl character on the Jetson would talk to her diary, and it was this like floating little, she would say, oh, die, and talk about her day. And I was like, that is basically Siri. And I do think design is like a big, massive, integral part of the path forward.
Yeah. When I think of design in the auto industry, I think of the kind of the clay prototypes and just that sort of very, very physical, industrial design. But design has got to be going so much deeper and so much more into the whole, again, to use the term that we've brought up several times, that human experience of getting from one place to another. So there must be all disciplines of design and practices of design happening in those companies. Is that how you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many different levels of design, from like what the interior of the car is going to look like now, and just even just storage space within the car.
What's on the screen when you're interacting with the control?
I know that OEMs are starting to pluck people, new hires from all different spaces, whether it's fashion or gaming. And those may not have been areas that they would have hired from 5 years ago, or even maybe 3 years ago. I don't know. And I think that that's really interesting too. I think gaming has such a wide reaching influence, like across so many industries. And I think that video game design is kind of creeping into other parts of the business world in ways that I wouldn't have thought about.
And beyond the actual design of a video game, but really the gaming mentality and the way that gaming can play a part in behavior change. You're talking about mental health. There's so much interesting territory to cover there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's so vast. And I think that there's a lot of people thinking about that and starting to try and solve for it. I think that it's for sure a theme that's emerging and has been emerging. Then there's still, of course, just furniture design, like you mentioned before.
Yeah. I know you've spoken to furniture designers, and that's obviously a historic, perhaps the sort of origin of design in many ways. Tell me about that encounter and what you were writing about there. What were the conversations like in that space?
Well, so I just wrote a story a couple months ago. This was also for a Fast Company, but it was about the challenges of being a mid-size furniture designer in the United States and the difficulty of finding manufacturing partners and the way that factories are tooled. The folks I talked to said that, if you're not making an incredible amount of furniture every year and working in a seasonal kind of churn like the big box retailers might be, then it's hard to find a manufacturing partner because it then becomes just so expensive to make what you want to make.
Yeah.
You could make whatever you want to make. You can get it made. It's just, are you going to be able to sell it then?
That's interesting because it's a permutation of the seat at the table metaphor in tech companies or bigger corporations where designers, they don't have access to the right parts of the business to do what they want to do or feel like they need to do or could do.
Yeah. And I think, like, for instance, this one company called Callan, they're in LA, they wanted to make a mattress and they wanted the mattress to be made with ticking fabric. They could only find partners that would make a mattress with the jersey fabric. At that time, that's what it was. They could make the ticking fabric mattress, but they would have to sell it for like $20,000. Who's going to buy that? And maybe a couple people will, but you're not going to find enough people to make it a sustainable, scalable business. There's this like tipping point of like, are we going to water down our design perspective and our value system to get into the rhythm of selling these things? Or are we going to kind of stick to our guns and continue to stay aligned with the craftsmanship and quality materials that we want to use? And then also there's the tooling and the machinery. If you want a piece of furniture like hand sprayed or hand treated in some capacity, not every factory has the ability to do that. They're running it through a machine or, down the line, and it's sort of.
Who were you interacting with in that furniture company? Who was the conversation with?
Was its founders.
Okay. Those founders who were wrestling with making the mattress that they wanted to make, did they have a design background? Was design their kind of core skill set?
Yeah. So I think they kind of started their business not really realizing the challenges that they were going to face. And then it was kind of like, oh.
We thought we were going to be making cool furniture, and here we are dealing with supply chains and manufacturing and the economics and all of the challenges. Yeah.
And I think that kind of goes back to when you leave design school, what are you doing with the skill set that you're carrying with you? When you leave an MBA program, what are you doing with that skill set that you're carrying with you? And how, in what circumstances are you going to be facing other demands that are going to push you outside of that to understand another skill set or background to be able to kind of like bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting to think about, well, what would a curriculum look like if you were to talk to Bracken Darrell? Like, what's his skill set? Is there a curriculum that would deliver you with the underpinnings of that skill set when you graduate? I don't know if that exists.
Yeah, I'll tell you, spoiler alert, it doesn't. It doesn't fully exist right now. And that's why we see so many leaders moving through
their design career and having to augment different aspects of their skill set to meet the demands of whatever it is that, that they have in front of them.
Yeah.
One closing question here, we've, as I've been having these conversations, working on this podcast series, I've been surprised at some of the topics that have come up as I've spoken to design leaders. Curious, as you've heard some of these stories on previous episodes, anything that you're picking up on that is surprising to you, or that maybe you find has some commonalities with other aspects of business?
I mean, it just seems to me like it's all integrated. It seems to me like this is becoming more and more of one thing and not these siloed off areas of business. And almost any conversation I have with anyone for any project, and I may not have picked up on it before because I just wasn't attuned to it, but now it's almost like, oh yeah, that is like sort of circling back to this conversation I had with so-and-so for this story I wrote that was about design, where I probably wouldn't. I look back now on the Inc. 500 and all of those conversations were design conversations.
Yeah.
And I hadn't any idea that they were at the time. I had no idea. I just thought, wow, here's an inventive person. Wow, she worked hard. Look what she did.
They're creative.
You really figured out the workaround there. Like it just was sort of like, oh. And I just kept feeling like, wow, these people are really creative. Wow, they're working really hard. Wow, they're really, big ideas. And those were all designers. They're all designers. And I had no idea. Going into that experience thinking this is going to be so boring. It's going to be talking about like Excel spreadsheets and revenue numbers and sales projections, and I just have no interest in this. And that's not at all what the experience was, covering, the stories we worked on at Inc. And doing what I'm doing now, I think, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And the word design, I don't think was ever used unless it was like specific to a product.
Well, that's fascinating. And that's a great way to kind of close out the loop here. We had a nice sort of circular journey from the beginnings of your career all the way back to the Inc. 500. So that was nice.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Nicole. I really appreciate your time and sharing your story with me. And we'll keep in touch, and I'll kind of keep you posted as all of this comes together.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
That's all for this episode of This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Special thanks to Scott Leach of Brand Speak Communications for his production assistance, and to Graham Barton for his original theme music. I'd love for you to help me grow the audience for this podcast by liking and following it on your favorite podcast platform. And I'd also love your help finding great design leaders for future episodes of the show. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with your ideas. You can also find out more about my work as a design leader on my website, dougpowell.design. Thanks for listening. Until next time.